the Qing Dynasty, which completely collapsed in 1912, ended its 276-year reign, and also brought an end to thousands of years of rule by Chinese feudal dynasties. But actually, feudal regimes may have ended. But the emperors of this country haven't. They just no longer sit on a throne as before. That was the case with Mao Zedong, and this time, it's Xi Jinping. On November 14, 2022, for the first time since becoming U.S. President, Joe Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping to seek solutions to the escalating tensions between the two countries. One year later, on November 15, 2023, Joe Biden met with Xi Jinping once again with the aim of easing tensions between the two superpowers. But even from their meeting in 2011, when Biden was the U.S. Vice President and Xi Jinping was the Chinese Vice President, Biden and his advisors likely understood that the future Chinese leader would be more difficult to deal with than Hu Jintao. They were right. But it was even harder than they could have imagined at the time. Americans will have to look back at Xi's past to understand what he went through during his youth, and how that shaped him into the most powerful man in the world. This was even before Xi Jinping was born, when the Civil War was still ongoing. This was the arduous retreat known as the Long March of the Chinese Workers and Peasants' Red Army, a journey of 12,000 km starting from Jiangxi, westward to Tibet, then northward to Yan'an in Shaanxi province, under the relentless pursuit of Chiang Kai-shek's forces. Less than 1/10 of the Red Army survived. Among them were the first generation of leaders such as Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Zhou Enlai, and also Xi Jinping, who later became Vice Premier of China in the late 1950s, and who is the father of the current Chinese President, Xi Jinping. The family of a high-ranking leader will possess the highest privileges and face the greatest dangers. Xi Jinping's family had both of those things when he was a child. Young Xi was attending an elite school in Beijing and often visited his father, Vice Premier Xi Jinping, at Zhongnanhai, the residence and workplace of high-ranking leaders. Young Xi spent his childhood years in comfort and luxury, while the majority of Chinese people lived in poverty. But then, the political winds shifted, and Xi Jinping was purged by Mao in 1962. Xi Jinping was then quickly imprisoned and subjected to public humiliation by the Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution. At this moment, the world of young Xi Jinping was completely turned upside down. In 1969, the young Xi Jinping was sent to a rural area in Shaanxi province to perform forced labor, living in caves and enduring daily hunger. This was part of Mao's campaign to bring young urban intellectuals back to the countryside during the Cultural Revolution. His time in Liangjie, a poor village in northwestern China, left Xi deeply frightened as he struggled with the harsh conditions. When Xi Jinping tried to return to Beijing, he was sent to a labor camp for 6 months. All those hardships, coupled with being separated from his father at an early age, probably prepared Xi Jinping to face the challenges he would face later. A knife not sharpened on a stone will not be sharp. Those who are tested by fire mature. Xi Jinping. 2001. It wasn't until the late 1970s, after Mao's death, that Xi Zhongshan's honor was restored. But Xi Jinping has never denied Mao. The opposite is true. Follow Mao's philosophy. And reality has shown that. So, how did it all happen? Today, only the most outstanding students in China can attend the prestigious Tsinghua University in Beijing. However, young Xi Jinping was admitted here in 1975 as a worker, peasant, and soldier. Before the official examinations took place, after graduating, Tsai left Beijing and began a promising career. First, he worked as an assistant to one of his father's closest confidants, the Minister of Defense, General Sithe Mbibu, at the Central Military Commission office. This period gave him close ties with the military. After leaving the Central Military Commission, he served as Deputy Secretary in Hebei, a predominantly agricultural province near Beijing, and then in Fujian, a coastal province opposite Taiwan, eventually becoming its governor in 2000. In 2002, Tsai became the governor and then secretary of Zhejiang, a province near Shanghai. Fujian and Zhejiang are considered to be home to emerging private economic zones. Take the giant corporation Alibaba, for example. Being a leader in provinces like these helps Xi not only reduce competition from rivals in Beijing, but also increase his prestige in various other areas. And from here, the road to Beijing begins to get closer. Xi Jinping was transferred to become the party secretary of Shanghai, China's second largest city, and began to emerge as a potential successor to Hu Jintao. Why? Because the veteran leaders of the party, who still wield influence even after retirement, prioritized a less ambitious princeling, someone with a relatively clean record, and someone who was easy to compromise with so they could easily control him. Tsi's past shows that he possesses all those qualities. But it turned out they were wrong. Tsai was not easily compromised and certainly not controllable. Tsi's path to joining the party was not easy. Tep was only admitted as a full party member in 1974. But since then, he has steadily climbed to the top. He placed absolute faith in the absolute power of the party. The group is following the color revolutions in Europe and the Arab Spring in the Middle East, which overthrew seemingly invincible regimes. In particular, the collapse of the Soviet Union. A major party has disappeared. That's all. Xi Jinping. 2012. Tsai has undoubtedly studied the collapse of the Soviet Union and has many reasons to worry about the Chinese Communist Party. In terms of size, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had more members than we did. But none of them were strong enough to stand up and resist. And Xi has shown that he is the only one tough enough to do this. Immediately after coming to power, Xi Jinping cracked down hard on dissidents and launched a large-scale anti-corruption campaign, led by Wang Qishan, one of the toughest figures in its implementation. The first major political earthquakes quickly emerged. The victims were two of Xi's rivals, Bo Xilai, the party secretary of Chongqing, and Zhou Yongkang, the Minister of Public Security. Both were overthrown following investigations into corruption and abuse of power. Fighting corruption is the most traditional and effective way to deal with those who stand in the way. the campaign didn't stop at just a few of Xi's rivals. It went far beyond that since late 2012, when the campaign began. More than 7 million officials have been investigated, and 5 million of them have been punished. This includes up to 7 members of the Politburo and the government, and approximately 24 high-ranking generals. 2 high-ranking officials were sentenced to death. During Mao's time, he held absolute and permanent power. But during Deng Xiaoping's time, it was a different story. He dismantled Mao's lifelong dictatorship. Deng limited the term of office for the Chinese president to a maximum of 2 5-year terms and established a more shared form of power. The same was true for later generations of Chinese leaders, such as Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. It is thanks to this system that Xi has had the opportunity to wield power in Beijing. But once he's achieved it, Xi is bringing everything back to what happened during Mao's time, when one person held absolute power. 2017. Traditionally, this would be the time for the president to announce his successor in 2022. But it seems Xi Jinping couldn't find anyone suitable. Instead, he trusted only himself, and thus Xi abolished the 2-term, 5-year presidential limit, effectively making himself a leader for life. Furthermore, to assert absolute power in China, you will need to have your own ideology. The ideology of the leadership, that's something that existed back in Mao's time. Even while the ban on personality cults remained in the party's constitution in October 2017. Xi Jinping, as ideology, titled Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era, was included in the party's constitution for the first time. The next step was to bring those loyal to that ideology into the Politburo. Not just 1, 2, or 3 people, but the whole group. Even Mao had political rivals. But Xi has ensured that he has no rivals to date. Amidst the challenges of Hong Kong, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, protests against the zero-COVID policy, and the lingering tensions between the US and China, Xi Jinping has secured a 3rd consecutive term as president of China, a feat unprecedented since Mao Zedong, who died. Let's take a look at the senior members of the Politburo that Xi has nominated. Li Qiang is one example. He was the party secretary of Shanghai and the first official to rise from the provincial level to the premiership without any prior experience at the central level. This means that, since former Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, Li Qiang is the only prime minister who has never served as deputy prime minister. Not to mention, Li Qiang was previously held responsible for the failures during the Shanghai lockdown, when the city was unable to provide enough food for tens of millions of its residents. But that's okay. Loyalty is far more important than ability. Similarly, the remaining members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party must all be loyal to Xi Jinping's ideology. During President Xi Jinping's more than 10 years in power, China's presence in the world has changed, with a China that is believed to be rising to become a superpower. Initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative not only risk turning many countries in the Asia-Pacific into major debtors to China, but they also give Xi Jinping growing power in the world. The more intimidating China becomes to the world, the greater Xi's power will grow. Napoleon Bonaparte said more than 2 centuries ago, China is a sleeping lion. Let it sleep. For when it awakens, it will shake the world. And Xi Jinping said, "Today the lion has awakened, but it is a peaceful, pleasant, and civilized lion." But have you ever seen a lion like that? And now, this peaceful, agreeable, and civilized lion still poses a constant threat to its surrounding nations. It is Japan that is concerned with resolving historical disagreements with China. Taiwan fears being swallowed up by the mainland. Southeast Asian countries are worried about being pressured by concepts like the Nine-Dash Line. Other internal problems exist in Hong Kong and Xinjiang as well. However, when there are too many hostile forces and too many challenges, an emperor's reign does not always end happily. From a princeling of the party. After enduring a difficult childhood, the young Xi Jinping has risen to become the most powerful person in China. Xi Jinping is 70 years old this year, and whether he can surpass Mao's 27-year reign remains to be seen. But first, Xi must overcome many of the current challenges, the most in his more than a decade of ruling China. Xi has changed the system to make himself the most powerful person. But be careful, because at some point, the system might catch up to him.